Thank you. I'm excited to be with you today. Before I get started on the presentation, though, I do a lot of speaking in Utah and various places. A lot of the speaking I do in Utah relates to the project that I started 4 years ago called the Utah Women in Education Project. So I took on looking at research, doing massive research around the state to understand why are women in Utah making the college decisions they are. Because we have lower than the national average on women graduating from college. So I'm excited to be able to talk about strengthening your influence today, the community leadership role of librarians. And actually, I mean, it's a great title, and I put it together, and then as I was preparing it, I really found that those two, even though they relate, as I speak to you today, I'm really going to kind of take them in chunks because there's some information really that goes with strengthening your influence, things for you as individuals, and then we'll kind of come out to community involvement and leadership in the community and so forth. So I actually have 5 main sections to the core of the presentation, and throughout that I have 5 critical questions that help us take that information and go out to the community leadership role of librarians. I teach leadership a lot, and most of my classes at UVU are men. And so a lot of my leadership classes are with men. Most of my research is around women. So when I speak to many female audiences, but much of the information is for both audiences. So it's great to see a combination here today. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about the research I've done, just briefly before I get started on that. I have researched for a decade the lifetime leadership development of high-profile women leaders. I have one of my books. I interviewed 10 of the women governors in the United States, which was really good because there were only 20 alive when I did my interviews, and I got 10 of them. That's really good. And then university presidents. I've interviewed top women leaders, and there's not very many in the United Arab Emirates and so forth. But my little niche that's quite different is to understand the lifetime. So that what happened in their homes, the influence of their fathers and mothers and their elementary school years and sports, and I mean, we looked at everything all of the way up and how important college was in helping develop leadership, and then career paths, kind of all the way up in those. So that's what my niche is. There's a lot of leadership books out there, but mine is really exploring that lifetime. And so this is what I've really described. And I call it young professional, but also studied women that didn't necessarily work for pay, okay? I always have to say that because raising kids is a lot of work and we don't get any money for that. And working in nonprofits and so we looked at all of those. And I have to say that when I speak in different places, people say, especially with my women in leadership, well, why do you do so many things, women in education, women in leadership? You know, were you raised with a whole bunch of sisters? Or why are you so interested in women? So I thought you would enjoy this picture. I have 6 brothers. And you know what, as I've done my research, a lot of self-reflection on how I was raised and how I became the leader that I am today and the person of influence, as we all are in our own ways. Your background really plays into that. Somehow, through my upbringing, I developed a voice, and what we call in the research a voice, and I call the other thing choice, that I felt like I had choices. So voice and choice are really a few things that I talk about a lot. When I or a woman or a minority or a white male or whomever feels like he or she has a voice, then that's and true choice, then that's my definition. So a few things to get us started today. Now, my first, as I said, I have 5 critical questions. And my first one is, why is leadership so important for all librarians? Now, I'm putting up this slide and you're looking at it going, yeah. So I'm going to put this up at the end, and hopefully you'll have a couple of ahas that help you believe it a little bit more. But just a few things, because you care, because you are needed, you love to learn. I'm assuming that. I have some very good friends that are librarians at UVU, and they love to learn. So I'm assuming all of you do. You have what it takes. You have the responsibility. You can be part of changing the world. So I wanted to just put that out there first, and then we'll come back to that. So for today, what I wanted to do, so I have the 5 critical questions, like I said, and then 5 areas that I want to talk to you about, really about strengthening your own influence. So the first one is assumptions, and then we'll look at identity and purpose, some barriers, some self-knowledge, and some developmental relationship. And my goal for you today is that you have a couple of ahas or get a couple of nuggets. You have been to leadership things before, I'm sure. So I have looked at kind of some things that I think might be a few things that you can get some ahas with today, something a little bit different. So looking at strengthening your influence. So first, one of my very favorite things to do is to see how Microsoft Clips defines things in pictures. Okay, all right. And one of the things that I have found through the research, and I know the literature very well, is, and this is true for everyone, one of the things that holds us back from being influential is our assumptions. And if you say you don't have assumptions, then you're just wrong. You're just plain wrong. That's what I'm going to tell you. We all have assumptions. And we have found, and I have in my research, that oftentimes assumptions hold us back from being more influential, from learning to lead. So let's look at these pictures, all right, and see what assumptions come out of these pictures. So you see that? That's leadership. That's one kind of leadership. Sometimes people think that's all that leadership is about. Big, do you see those muscles standing on top of a hill? That's an assumption about leadership. That was in Microsoft Clips. You're at the front of the, making some noise. That's what leadership is. Now here's one. There's not very many with women at all in these. But look at that. There's some assumptions there, right? Maybe she's separated from the others. She's got high heels. That's an assumption. If you're a leader and you're a woman, you have to wear high heels. Another one, there's a lot of big men in Microsoft Clips. This one, winning and losing, that's an assumption. Another big, like I said, big and a small person, and that's what leadership is, right? So these are just some of them, and this is a pretty good representation. I actually do a workshop every summer in Hawaii. It's at a place called the East-West Center that bring in 12 emerging women leaders from 12 different countries. So one from India, Papua New Guinea, Korea. It's really fun. I love it. But what I do is have these post-it note activities, and I have them actually draw pictures. And I spend a couple of hours at the first just seeing what they believe leadership is. If you do not do that for yourself, you cannot be as influential moving forward. If you do not, and many women, I have to say, have assumptions, and men too, that leadership is a certain way, and that you have to be loud, or you have to be tall. I get that sometimes. You have to be tall to be a leader. I'm like, what is that? That's really not true. Or you have to be, loud is a big one, or you have to be charismatic. That's just not the case anymore for good leaders. Influential people can do things quietly. You are leading. If you lead, if you are leading, if you are influencing, that is leadership. So I'm challenging you to think about what your assumptions are. Is this making sense to you? About leadership and what you're saying. And some people say it's a formal position. But do you know, maybe not in your system, but I do, people that are in formal high positions and are not leaders? Do you know people with no titles that are very much leaders, and you would follow them or ask them? Okay, so it's not just the title. So this is a very important, I'm spending a little bit of time, but I found, and the research supports, that this is one of the things that holds us back from strengthening our influence. So, and I don't want to take time to go through these, but even some of the dictionary definitions really puts us into those categories of black and white, this and that, when in reality, leadership can be so many different things. So my definition of leadership is a process, not position. It is a process of influencing. It's the intersection of leaders and followers and the situation. The intersection can be in the middle. It's so interesting when I get a woman from China, her picture looks totally different. Can you picture what her picture might look like? Hierarchy? Okay, and women from different countries, sometimes the leader is in the middle and there's all kinds of circles. In some countries, they're in boxes. It's really fascinating to have people draw pictures of what they think leadership is. So a few more assumptions. So for women, specifically, one of the things that many women assume are that people do not accept women leaders. This from 2009 says, very good research, 90% of people now say that they are good and can support women leaders. So if you have an assumption that leadership should be a male, or this, or it should look like this, some of these things are just not true anymore. And I wanted to put this is a lot of info, but I wanted to put this up to say, and this one is really from my women's work as well, that I do often have women that say, men say this too, that men are better leaders in general, that women are not better leaders. The latest research though, and you look at the means, women actually, and this was 20,000 different people that responded to these, they actually rated women higher in this particular study on all kinds of things, including taking initiative, building relationships. Other studies have men higher, but many of them now are just saying, just that assumption is something we've got to let go. Because men in certain situations can be great leaders in some things, women can be better leaders in other things. So that's what I'm just trying to shake up your assumptions a little bit and get you thinking about that. So, number 2, identity and purpose. One of the things the research is coming out, this is really a research area for about the last 3 years, that for men and women it's a little bit stronger than men in that women typically need more to see a real purpose, to feel what the literature calls calling. I'm talking about a calling or a purpose. Maybe it's from a higher power, maybe it's just something you feel inside. You know what I mean? That you're supposed to be doing certain work. So many women and men, I would say as well, they don't necessarily step forward unless they feel, is this making sense? That there's a real reason for them to step forward, that they're called to do that there's a purpose, that they need to identify themselves as well. So a purpose, a calling, that they have motivations. The research says for women, it's about half as much. They think that they need to know everything before they step up. And the change in that is when someone gives them the tap and someone said, you can do this, I see this in you, then that woman will feel purpose. And that happens as well to men, but in general, this is an important principle to look at. And I love this quote by John Dewey, the discovery of capacity and aptitude will be a constant process as long as growth continues. So as long as we're willing to grow, we're gonna think, improve in our thinking and our capacity and everything, so we can continue to influence. Now this is actually from one of my studies, 2 of my studies. So I also work with people on figuring out why are you motivated? Why, you need to understand why you would step forward, why you are stepping forward. Now I have to say that this was a list from the governors, it's in rank order, and the university presidents combined. If I had CEOs, do you think it would be different? Do you notice there's not money on here? Money would maybe be on there, a few things. But I wanted to show you this so that you could think about your own motivations. If you do not have motivations or purpose or feel called, you're probably not going to lead, right? You're probably not. So this is a self kind of reflection thing for you to think about. So these were the answers when I asked them, what have been your motivations to lead? And you can see, to make a difference, to positively influence, to have power. I'm glad some of them admitted that. We as women have a tough time with that word. What do we say instead? Influence. We say, I can influence, but for some reason we think that's bad a little bit. So that's what I want you to think about in your own life, is just your purpose and your calling and so forth with that. I wanted to read one story from my research. Got to get a little of my research in here. I love it. And this is from one of the governors. Barbara Roberts was the first female governor in the 80s in Oregon. And this is her experience on motivation to lead. It's about 4 slides, so bear with me. Nobody knew what was happening with him. We knew something was amiss, but he was my first child, and I had no preparation for this challenging behavior. So boy, did I learn patience. I think in some ways it softened me so that I had more patience with other people. I could see other people's points of view more because of those experiences. I was not so quick to judge either. Maybe it was my recognition that something wasn't okay with my son. It's amazing how non-judgmental one becomes. Here I was with a difficult 6-year-old, and he couldn't go to school. Parents just expect children to go to school. That's what children do. He ended up at the Health Science University, and they put him through diagnostic work and decided that he had a severe emotional disturbance. They didn't use the term autism back then. They recommended that we permanently institutionalize him. They said he would never be able to function, that he would never be able to go to school. They said he would never be able to work and that he would never be able to live alone. Basically, he would never be able to be independent in any way. This child was hopeless as far as they were concerned. And they suggested we permanently institutionalize him. That was a huge blow, a huge blow. It was not only a blow for him and for me, but it was a blow to my marriage. Lots of fathers had trouble accepting children with severe disabilities. The counselor blamed me, but I would not let him do this. I argued with him about this for 3 years. I knew he was wrong. I knew my child, and I knew something had been different with this child from the beginning. It did hurt that I was blamed, but I kept saying, no, it's not true. You're wrong. He kept saying, Barbara, you're in denial. You've got to accept this, and if you accept that you were at fault, then we'll be able to help him more. Interestingly, years later, the counselor sent me a long letter of apology for what he'd done. I accepted his apology. This was another profound learning experience related to what it means to stand up for what you know is right. I learned that you have to confront and sometimes go against powerful people and powerful organizations. I learned I had this strength and ability because of the experiences I had with my son and his struggles. We, a group of parents, went to our state representative and told him that we wanted a bill in the legislature that would fund special education into state law. It was kind of a dreamer bill, and we knew it. However, he agreed to sponsor a bill for us. I had done a small amount of politics, so I decided to step forward. No one else in the group was willing to do it because they were scared. I agreed to take 1 day off of a week of work. The group promised to pay my expenses and gasoline. I was receiving no child support by then, so it was financially difficult. However, through this experience, I learned the legislative process. In 5 months, I lobbied the bill through the legislature, and it became Oregon law. There wasn't a lot of funding in the bill then, but I found out that I could literally change the people's lives through the legislative process. This was a huge lesson for me. I found new confidence. I also found out I was good at the political process and liked it very much. I was hooked by the end of the session. Isn't that a good story? And it was interesting to study motivations, to where these women that I interviewed really got that motivation and that desire to at least step into that new realm. And maybe it's not becoming the governor or whatever for us, but there are also always new realms of, even within your system, new realms, new opportunities to step into it. And sometimes when we explore our own lives and come up with really some influences in our life and more thoughtfully look at how we can contribute, that clarity is important for us to become more influential. So the third are barriers. I don't want to talk too long about this, but one thing I've realized working with women and researching, and men as well, that we don't have to just stay, anyone that wants women to have a voice and respect is a feminist, but I'm not a liberal feminist that thinks pretty much everything is wrong with the world in terms of those kinds of issues. But one thing that I found is when you understand your perceived barriers, whether they're real or not, you can actually become more influential because you understand them. And you can figure out how to either push them down, go around them, let go of things. You can just be more informed. So a few things. First of all, external and internal barriers. There's both. There's both. I mean, we have external barriers around us. So I'm not going to go through this. But these are just some external barriers, particularly for women, but they can be other barriers as well. And you know what? Just understanding that you may have these external barriers is helpful for you to figure out how to become more influential. Now, I do want, and someone, who was it? It was you. You just told me you were reading Lean In. Excellent book. She's getting some pushback. I know the people that work with her, because I'm a researcher that has a lot of publications, so people read my stuff. And one of the things I know is that she's getting some pushback because she has brought to the surface that everything's not about external benefits, although those are really real, right? But we bring some barriers within ourselves for our lives, not just women, men, minorities, everybody. This is one specifically, a quote from the book about women. In addition to external barriers erected by society, women are hindered by barriers that exist within ourselves. We hold ourselves back in ways both big and small, by lacking self-confidence, by not raising our hands, by pulling back when we should be leaning in. We internalize negative messages we get throughout our lives, the messages that say it's wrong to be outspoken, aggressive, more powerful than men. We lower our own expectations of what we can achieve, and then down to that last sentence, compared to our male colleagues, few of us aspire to senior positions. This is taken from some research. So it is good to understand our barriers, and then I put some other ones up that I don't know if this relates to your group, but I was kind of guessing that other barriers as well might be, it's not my job. I see that sometimes. It's not in my job description to do this leadership maybe in the community, all right? I don't see the opportunities out there, someone's not asking me to do these things, waiting for someone to ask. Lack of understanding of your own strengths. And I was so happy to hear that you did the Strengths Finder. I'll tell you, that can be really powerful if you let it be. Not aware of the needs in the workplace, lack of self-confidence, different things. Those are all barriers. I don't want to weigh on this too much. But one thing we have found, if you want to strengthen your influence, and I'm still working on that myself, I think all of us should do that, we need to be aware of our assumptions, of the barriers and the different things that we've talked about today. So let's go to critical question 2. Why is community support, so kind of going back out, so we've been in to you and working on you and your influence, but let's come out a little bit. Why is community support and advocacy integral to strengthening your own organizations? Just to let you know, I was using Google and I put in the words, Utah Library Mission Statement. These are the 3 that pop up. So when I was looking at that question that I was asked to talk about, my first question as a business professor is, what's their mission statement, right? What's the purpose? Look at that. I've highlighted the 3 things that relate to community. I don't know if this is true for all of yours. So think about your own mission statement. So do you see this? The U of U Library inspires the creation discovery for Utah and the world. So that's community, right? Next one, provides staff to inspire, to promote ideas, inspire lifelong learning, and strengthen communities is there. And the last one, you can see exchange of ideas, build communities. So when I looked at these mission statements, community is there. My perception is that community is important. So why, for you to be able to do the mission of your institutions, you need to have the support and relationships of the community. So, make sense? It just makes sense to me as kind of an outsider. All right, another question. So how does leadership play a role in relationship building to gain community support. So we've already decided that being involved in the community is a big, or helping the community in some way, is really important for libraries. That's part of your mission. So gaining community support is very important, and to be able to gain support, you have to build relationships, right? You have to. I mean, that's how you do it. Relationship building is an interesting thing, because I think maybe everybody in your organizations do not see it as their role to connect in the community, while maybe some others. So that's something I want to challenge you with. Is it the responsibility of a few at your organization? Or is it not in your job description? Or is it really the responsibility of everyone that works within your library or within your system to develop relationships? So how can you strengthen your influence? We've talked about assumptions. We've talked about identity and purpose. We've talked about understanding barriers. And now I want to do a little bit, and you've had the Strengths Finder, which helps, a little bit on expanding your self-knowledge. And then I just have a little bit to end with developmental relationships as well. So with self-knowledge, and if I was doing a workshop instead of a speech, I would give you some exercises to do. But these are some things that I think are really important. Who am I? And do you like my word, really? Come on. You can always say things, but really, who are you? What are your strengths? What are areas for improvement? What are the barriers we've talked about? What values are at the core of who you are? And what are your leadership motives? And we talked about that as well. I love this quote that says, "Jack pines are not lumber trees, and they won't win many beauty contests either. But to me, this valiant old tree, solitary on its own rocky point, is as beautiful as a living thing can be. In the calligraphy of its shape against the sky is written strength of character and perseverance, survival of wind, drought, cold, heat, disease. In its silence, it speaks of wholeness and integrity that comes from being what you are." I have many people that said, you know, I need to change myself to be a leader. No, you don't. Leadership is just more of who you are already. So don't think that you need to change the core of who you are. So let me read you this quote that came from one of the university presidents. So I want to challenge you to think about this for that comment back here on what values are at the core of who you are. And I have lots of exercises that helps people kind of figure out this core, because sometimes you can say you have values, but when push comes to shove, sometimes you have different values than you say you do. Me as well. I think that leadership cuts so totally to the core of an individual's character and personality. We should try to identify one's character and who they really are instead of their leadership style or philosophy. My best advice to a candidate is to go in and be as much who you are as possible. After this interview today, I would hope that you would leave, you would know who I am in a way that you wouldn't if I just answered some well-defined questions in a very detailed, deliberate manner. These kinds of questions and responses will not tell you who I am or what my character is about. Universities hire leaders for the crises. In a crisis, we all go immediately into that core of who we are and what our values are. We can't help it. It's just a human thing that happens. In a crisis, you've got to be sure a leader has enough substance in his or her core. If the core is weak, you are not going to have a leader. If that core is not one that is whole and can move with very deliberate actions, you are going to be in trouble. When I confronted some unethical situations at one institution, somebody said, "Why did you stand up? Didn't you know it would get you into trouble?" I said, "It never occurred to me not to stand up. I didn't think about options. It was a crisis, and I went to my core. My core knew there were things that were wrong. There were things that had to be done, and as the president, I'm the one that has to do them." The core kicks in when it's tough. When an individual doesn't have a core filled with ethics and character, then the institution is in trouble. You have to develop that core if you want people to have confidence in you. You need to know who you are before you can be authentic. Isn't that a good quote? So that's just one way, to think about crises, that the core comes up, your main values comes up. So think back in your life to some things that have happened and see what some of those core values are. See if you would like to develop more or adjust. Another thing within this, self-knowledge. And I love this piece, and some of you will think, well, how does this relate? But one thing that we have found in understanding yourself is looking back on your childhood and adolescence is actually a critical element for developing leadership now. Not that you want to hang out forever in the past, but what we found when we develop people who become more influential is the more they understand about their past and the more they understand about where they are, and the more they can look and understand and develop themselves to become more influential. What has happened in the past can enable you to make things happen now so that you can become the master of your own life rather than its servant. But looking back on how you became you, how you developed the skills and abilities to become, who you are today is very, very interesting. I think some of the skills we develop definitely comes from our experience. So here are just a few things, but one thing I wanted to look at is what I call transformational moments. And I'll tell you over and over again, in this research with the Women in Education Project, as well as with the research I've done for my books and other studies, every time these moments come up. And women sometimes are told specifically that they must have a mentor. And mentors are good. Mentors are great if they work out. But what we've had are a lot of women that say, I guess I can't be a leader because I don't have a mentor. That's not right. What I found is that mentoring is good, the coaching is good, but sometimes your life or someone else's can change and be transformed in just a moment. And the way that you look at yourself or way that you look at other things changes because of the moments. And people that can learn from the moments actually develop themselves more instead of ignoring those moments or those situations. So I love this story. One specific incident really shaped me with regard to racial challenges. Even though we were of modest means, like most families in the South, we had a black maid. Her name was Ophelia. She was in our home most days from the time I was crawling until I was 7. In many ways, she raised me. I still remember so many things about household chores and cooking that she taught me. I loved her dearly. Usually, Ophelia took the streetcar home. For some reason, one day, my father decided to take her home, and he asked me if I would like to go. So I was terribly excited and jumped into the back seat of the car, and my father said, no, you have to sit in the front seat. Ophelia will sit in the back seat. That did not make sense to me as a child because the adult sat in the front, and I sat in the front and was pretty upset about it, and I cried easily, and I think I cried all the way home. I was in the front seat. Ophelia was in the back, and it was just not right. When she got out of the car, my father turned to me and said something unforgettable. If she had ridden in the front seat with me, she would be dead by morning. It hit me to my very core in a way of understanding the injustice of the world that I lived in, where race was such an important issue. That had a huge impact on me, and it's a story I will never forget. And this is a university president that, she was probably in her early 60s at the time that I interviewed her, and she, white woman, but she was had become one of the loudest voices on racial issues in the United States. And she told me this story, that is the moment when she was young. And moments happen to all of us, and some of them we can't remember because we don't pay attention, we don't learn. But I found from interviewing these women that if you grasp onto these moments, you can actually have these ahas that will help you strengthen your influence. This is about a high school teacher, but I want to tell this one. This one is a great story. And one of the things that we found is when I studied these women's voices, I found that the parents were super important, but they always had 2 other people in their lives who valued their voices. And so this is one I enjoy. One year when I was in high school, there was a big issue about 4 or 5 boys who had gotten expelled from school for a week or two. They had skipped a day of school for the opening of fishing season and went fishing. I spoke to a teacher and said, this doesn't make any sense. She asked me if I would talk to the principal about it, so she walked me down to his office. I said, Mr. Smith, this doesn't make any sense. These boys are in trouble for skipping a day of school, and now you have them out of school for 10 days. Now they're fishing for 10 days straight. There's nothing sensible about that. Why don't you stop the long suspensions, bring them in, and make them do long study halls to make up for what they missed? You've given them exactly what they want, more time to fish. He said, it's just the only real form of punishment we have for skipping school. I said, but there are other forms. It doesn't have to be this way. He listened to me. These adults seemed to value my opinion. I ended up working in the principal's office during my junior and senior years of high school. Is that interesting? So I'm giving you a few examples to just have you think back in your own journey to becoming who you are. And again, that really ties into helping you become more influential moving forward. I love this quote. There are lessons in everything. And if you are fully deployed, you will learn most of them. Experiences aren't truly yours until you think about them, analyze them, examine them, question them, reflect on them, and finally understand them. The point, once again, is to use your experiences rather than being used by them. To be the designer, not the design, so that experiences empower rather than imprison. Isn't that a beautiful quote? So the last piece of this, and then we'll have a couple of questions to come back, is really, I could go into a lot of other things on self-knowledge, but those are just a couple. I knew I had heard you did the Strengths Finder, and I'm sure you've done some other assessments and so forth, and those are very important in understanding yourself. So I kind of went on a few things that I thought maybe you hadn't experienced to really think about that. So hopefully this information, too, the work that I've done, helps parents, it helps school teachers and so forth figure out how do we help more people become leadership through the experiences they've had. There's a lot of good data on the importance of sports and other teams, kinds of activities and debate and all kinds of things in high school. It's very fascinating. So as you move forward, developmental, we call them developmental relationships. Let me just give you a little clue that a lot of people call everything mentoring. And everything is not mentoring. Mentoring is a very specific thing. There's coaching, there's other kinds of things. There's just role models maybe that you never talk to. Everything is not mentoring. So we call them developmental relationships. Bottom line, those are great, whether they're peer relationships, developing networks. I mean, all of those are good. And reaching out and being a mentor or a coach to someone else is our responsibility as well as we become more influential. I have to say something that I had forgotten to say at the beginning that I think is important. One thing, I think years ago, we used to think more about, there's a group back here, I bet, he's got the skills to be a leader and maybe she does. But, I say we don't have that luxury anymore. We do not have the luxury to have some people become influential, some people become leaders, and say you don't have what it takes. We don't. Every person is needed. When you look at the news, even within Utah, things within our communities, things that we can help with, we need every young girl and every young boy to develop leadership. We need every woman and every man in this room to continue to develop leadership. I just don't think we have the luxury to not do that anymore. So these are in rank order of what these people in my studies, 3 studies on this one, felt the best things, the best experiences. A new job and position helps them grow a lot. Okay, that was the first one. Second one, new assignments, tasks, opportunities. And I don't know, I would think, this is my guess, that you have some flexibility within your jobs to create even, does this make, I don't know, to create or take on new assignments or look for those. So that is sometimes up to you. I have so many people though that sit back and say, I'm just waiting for other people, and it's like, whoa, you know, you may be waiting forever for a good opportunity if you don't step forward and do that. Third one, just learning to observe and reflect. Reflection is one of the biggest things that we talk about and learn. And I'll tell you, my students come to me and most of them do not know how to reflect well. And pushing them to learn how to reflect and connect things is really a skill that we can learn and develop. Oh, I love this one. The women in my research said over and over again that they learned more from their mistakes and failures than they did from their successes. And you know what? I know a lot of people that just don't like to go there. They have something, and they're like, nope, don't want to think about it, don't want to go there. My philosophy is, if you're going to go through crap, let it build you. Get in there, deal with it, learn from it. Don't waste your bad times and not learn from them. Openness to honest feedback. I will tell you that this is one of the top management issues in decades, is the problem that we have giving feedback and receiving feedback. All right? People get offended, or we think they're going to be offended, but in reality, you know, they do something wrong for years and wish you would have told them a long time ago. But people really struggle with feedback sometimes, so that's a skill that needs to be developed. And then formal training and education, like your experience here, those transformational or influential moments that we talked about, professional organizations, networks was the next one that was mentioned, and then 9, I love this one. Test and push the limits. And when you do that, that really helps you continue to build your influence. I have people that tell me that they haven't been able to develop leadership because they have not worked for pay or whatever. And the women that I've interviewed, the governors and so forth, they learned more oftentimes from being on boards of nonprofits or you know, being students or other things. So the last critical question is, so how can you become, and this is assuming, the wording is assuming you're not already leaders, so I apologize for that, but how can you become leaders in your own community? So a few suggestions that I thought about. Find and use your voice. And there's research around that voice. I mean, sometimes you can have a different voice or a voice that's, you know, in different ways than you have used, so fine. Make the choice. Don't wait. Make the choice. Lean in. Take risks. That's really hard. Men have a little bit easier time taking risks than women, but take risks. There's all kinds of, it doesn't mean you have to lose your job or you're putting your job up, those kinds of things. Sometimes they're just reaching out, doing a little bit more, putting yourself on the line that makes you a little uncomfortable, but that's how you can grow. Find the gap. That's what I did with this project. And I don't have time to tell you, but you know, I knew there was a problem. I had talked to the commissioner, and I decided to lean in. I decided I can do this, and I know I can do this. I didn't know how to do it, but for 4 years, and I ended up, after 2 years, getting the attention of the whole legislature. I've been on the news a lot, and then the Governor Herbert, created a task force on it, and we've gone to the top of the state. It's been on the news a lot. Basically, we believe that it really is changing the face of how women think about it, how men, how fathers can help their daughters, how everybody can help. And that's because I just decided to lean in, because I knew something was wrong. And I found that gap. I challenge you to find that gap too, wherever it is, what needs to be. And even if it's not in your job description, you can lean in, you can find that gap, you can do something, and then understand change. That's a whole different area that I love, and how to do that, and then continue to strengthen your influence. So back to this slide that I started with, why is leadership important for all librarians? I have the same stuff up here. Because you can, you really can. Because you care, and I believe that you care. Because you're needed, and there's no doubt there. Because you love to learn. Because you have what it takes, and I know if I had time to meet with every one of you, I would find out how remarkable each of you is. And I have no doubt each of you is remarkable. You have the responsibility, and you can be part of changing the world. I love this quote. Our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We were born to make the magnificent, the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. I like that. And the last quote I love is, each time a person stands up for an idea or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, she sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. We can be influential, we can be leaders, and whether that is in our own homes, or our communities, or our churches, or within your organization's various libraries, or deciding to run for office and stepping forward, we need some good legislators, some new legislators in the state. Or I've done speeches and work at the United Nations, and I am so amazed when I meet a woman from an African country who has single-handedly changed the face of health for women in her nation by standing up, by having her voice, and by making a difference and being willing to do that. So I challenge myself as well as you to be able to do that, to find that leader within you, to strengthen that leader that's already within you, and then to really lean in and look for those opportunities to do more within your own workplaces and beyond. Thank you so much.